Now to our lead story tonight. It's the third day of the emergency in the Maldives, but the government, led by President Yameen, continues to insist that it is business as usual in the country. In a statement issued earlier today, the government extended an invitation to its international partners to visit the Maldives. The Yameen government says that no curfew has been imposed and the general movement of people, services and businesses will not be affected in the coming days. It insists that tourism, which is the largest industry in the Maldives and accounts for 28% of the country's GDP, has not been affected by the emergency. Many see the statement as a move to counter the travel advisories issued by several countries to their citizens against visiting Male unless absolutely necessary. But as many as 20 constitutional rights of citizens have been suspended and the situation on the ground still remains tense. Former President WION Gravitas still remains under arrest. According to some reports, he is on a hunger strike. The police say that they're investigating attempts allegedly by opposition leaders to topple the Yameen government. And they say that WION Gravitas was arrested for allegedly trying to bribe lawmakers. Meanwhile, former President Mohammad Nasheed continues to call on India for support. In a tweet, he said, and I'm quoting here, "Maldivians see India's role positively. In 1988, they came, resolved the crisis and left. They were not occupiers, but liberators. This is why Maldivians look to India now." The former president, who has been in exile since 2015 in Sri Lanka, wants a military intervention from India. But China, which is another prominent player in the Maldives, has warned against it. Listen to this.
我们希望马尔代夫的有关各方能够通过对话协商妥善解决分歧，尽快恢复国家的稳定和社会安定。我想我们呼吁的是有关的各方。同时，我们也相信马尔代夫的政府、政党和人民有智慧、有能力，能够自主地应对目前的状况。
In an op-ed in Chinese government mouthpiece, the Global Times, Beijing has tried to sermonize India, saying political struggles are supposed to be internal affairs. The Chinese mouthpiece said, and I'm quoting, "Political struggles are supposed to be internal affairs and New Delhi has no justification to intervene in Male's affairs. The Maldives' sovereignty should be respected and the political unrest should be left to the Maldivian people to address." The Chinese mouthpiece also accused India of having a desire to control South Asian countries. India has already cautiously reacted to the developments in Male, urging all sides to abide by the country's Supreme Court order to release all political prisoners, quote unquote, in the spirit of democracy. China has been investing heavily, remember, in the Maldives, mainly due to the Belt and Road Initiative. The Maldives holds the key to unlock the Indian Ocean region for this project. And China has already taken control of the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka and Djibouti in the Horn of Africa. The Maldives connects Bangladesh and Sri Lanka in the east to Pakistan and Djibouti in the west, enabling the string of pearls route around the Indian subcontinent. And that is what makes Maldives so very important for China. The crisis in that country shows no sign of letting up. India has mobilized her troops as part of a standard operating procedure in place for crises in the Maldives. There are reportedly 500 to 600 troops standing by for departure and several transport aircraft if things spiral out of control in Male, which is barely 700 kilometers south of India. There's plenty of criticism from naysayers in China and Pakistan, of course. Indeed, there is hardly a section of the South Asian media which does not routinely bash India but thinks nothing of asking for its help when the going gets rough. But India will not rush in where angels fear to tread. If it sent forces to Sri Lanka during the Lankan civil war, it did so at Colombo's request. To the Maldives too, it will send help if asked. But this is a little more tricky, and that is a conundrum, because asked by whom is the question. The controversial government of President Yameen is in absolute control, or the joint opposition, mainly in exile. Who should India listen to? And why would India be so interested in containing disturbances in the small island nation and willing to risk more condemnation? Asian analysts are indicating that there is more to it than meets the eye. Commentators are pointing to a joint effort by the United States and India to contain China, both through months of backdoor support to the judiciary and the opposition of the Maldives and a series of other unilateral moves in that region. In other words, the US and its quote-unquote most important strategic ally in the region, India, are working on stringing a new and shiny choker across the Indian Ocean in answer to China's sprawling string of pearls. The Maldives would be the centerpiece of such a necklace. The Maldivian Islands belong to the same ancient volcanic chain that includes India's Lakshadweep Islands to the north and Chagos Archipelago to the south of the Maldives. Chagos will probably not ring a bell to the viewers, to all of you, but the name Diego Garcia, its largest island, certainly will. That is where the United States has its largest overseas military base, the hub from where it flies sorties to Afghanistan and keeps an eye on both Russia and China. It's very important to the US as well. Understandably, Washington under President Barack Obama tried to sign a defense agreement which envisaged US bases in the Maldives as well. But Mr. Abdullah Yameen toppled the former democratically elected president of the Maldives, Mr. Mohammed Nasheed, and that agreement was put on the back burner. Now, if Mr. Yameen is removed and Mr. Nasheed returns to Mali, the US-Mali agreement would be right back on the cards, and that is what Washington wants. The United States has also named India its most important strategic partner in South Asia, but independent of its growing friendship with the US, India has been no slouch in the Department of China watching either. India already has a logistical naval presence in Singapore's Changi base, which is very close to the disputed South China Sea, which enables India to watch Chinese ships sail through the Straits of Malacca. Looking further west to the Indian Ocean, India has invested $45 million in an airfield and a monitoring station in Seychelles off the coast of Africa. But will India go all out to support exiled President Mohammed Nasheed is the million-dollar question now. President Nasheed has exasperated New Delhi with his own earlier enthusiasm for closer cooperation with China. His current closeness to Western human rights organizations, which frequently try to meddle in India's domestic affairs, also is anathema to New Delhi. Yet, and for the purpose of the proverbial pearl choker to contain China, it is clear that President Yameen must be contained. For if there was any Maldivian who has given China a free run of the island nation, it is the current incumbent. Whether Mr. Nasheed or another, a more India-friendly government in the Maldives would certainly be what New Delhi will be keen to see. The US and India may well be stringing that pearl choker to manage Chinese expansion together, but everything indicates that Washington would ideally like India to do the dirty work, to go it alone in the Maldives, and much points towards the fact that New Delhi will not oblige. India's cautious diplomacy-based approach, in fact, to domestic issues in other countries has a solid and sensible base, and that is realpolitik. Washington and New Delhi may be great friends and fellow monitors of China, but India will never allow the United States to shoot over New Delhi's shoulder, especially in its own South Asian backyard. Defense deals are always a big deal, both for a country's military prowess and its political discourse. Governments fall over suspected scams. They must tread the fine line between keeping security secrets and answering the opposition, especially in a democracy. The government in New Delhi seems to be battling a similar situation. The Rafale deal has sparked an intense political debate in India. The government is facing fire for citing the secrecy clause in not revealing details of the $8.7 billion Rafale deal with France. It is also being questioned for passing an offer for Eurofighter Typhoon, which was much cheaper. There was uproar in the upper house of parliament on Friday. The cue was provided by Congress President Rahul Gandhi, the leader of the opposition. Ahead of the session, he tweeted, and I quote, Raksha Mantri says the price negotiated for each Rafale deal by the Prime Minister and his reliable buddy is a state secret. Action points: informing Parliament about the price is a national security threat, and brand all who ask anti-national, the great Rafale mystery, as he calls it. India's Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said details of the deal cannot be disclosed as India had signed the secrecy pact with France. She said, and I'm quoting again, as per Article 10 of the intergovernmental agreement between the Government of India and the Government of France on the purchase of Rafale aircraft, the protection of the classified information and the material exchange under IGA is governed by the provisions of the security agreement signed between the two nations. The argument cuts no ice. Opposition leader Rahul Gandhi continued to mock the government and its defence. But is there substance to the Congress's attack? Is the Indian Defence Minister wrong in refusing to divulge details of the deal, citing the secrecy clause? Or was the minister at fault merely for having earlier promised that she would provide the necessary information? What's interesting is that the Congress is attacking an argument that it itself had provided when in power. It's worth noting what happened 5 years back when the Congress-led UPA was in government in New Delhi. In a written reply in the upper house of the Indian Parliament on the 6th of March 2013, 5 years back, the then Defence Minister, also Congress leader A.K. Antony, cited the secrecy clause under the Italian law to deny disclosure of information on the Augusta-Westland VVIP chopper deal, the helicopter deal. He said, and I quote, "Given the independence of the Italian judiciary from the executive and the preliminary investigation being covered by the secrecy clause under the Italian law, no concrete information was received." While it has put the opposition on the back foot, the question is how much water does the secrecy argument really hold? What is the truth? Is the government obliged to reveal how it spends the taxpayers' money when it goes for a mega defence deal? This is what we know. Secrecy in the name of national security is a norm around the world. The secrecy clause is an accepted and inherent part of multi-million-dollar defence deals. In the name of national security, most defence pacts are shielded from the Right to Information Act. Just last year, Turkey's Defence Procurement Office had refused to disclose details of a contract with Russia for acquisition and deployment of the Russian S-400 long-range air and anti-missile defence system. It said the details could not be disclosed because of secrecy clauses in the contract. The case is similar in most countries across the world, and that does not necessarily make it right. And most certainly, we haven't heard the last of this debate in India. But beyond the political debate, the deal per se is very, very significant. Here's a look at the Rafale aircraft deal and why it matters for the Indian forces.
It took nearly a decade for India to acquire the Rafale jet for the Indian Air Force. In fact, when this aircraft enters service with the Indian Air Force, there will be no fighter in service with Pakistan or China, which will be capable of hitting targets as deep in enemy territory. The Rafale is a twin-engine medium multi-role combat aircraft manufactured by Dassault Aviation, a French company. It is capable of performing a wide range of combat roles, which includes ground support, air supremacy and nuclear deterrence. India secured the Rafale deal after long negotiations. The Indian Air Force has expressed the need of additional aircraft since 2001, but the process to acquire a new fighter aircraft only began in 2007. Rafale was given a contract after 6 leading aircraft manufacturers competed to clinch the deal. Though the initial contract was to buy 126 jets, the Indian government scaled it down to 36 off-the-shelf fighter jets. While there is a secrecy clause that guards the fine print of the deal, back in 2016, the Indian government had told the lower house of parliament that each Rafale aircraft will cost the exchequer around 670 crores, which includes the equipment, services and weapons required for a single fighter. It is the cost factor which has become a subject of political war in India. India's main opposition party, the Congress, claims that the UPA government had managed to secure a cheaper deal for the Rafale from the French. According to the numbers put out by the French Senate, acquiring a single unit of the most advanced Rafale should cost more than 500 crores. But here's the key to the India story. The additional cost paid by the Indian government includes certain modifications that have been made specially for the Indian Air Force. Besides France, Egypt and Qatar are 2 other countries that use the Rafale fighters. Just like the Indian government, both Egypt and Qatar have kept the fine print of their deals a secret. But they ended up paying prices similar to or higher than the Indian Air Force. The Rafale will join the Indian Air Force by April 2022. It will replace 14 obsolete MiG-21s and MiG-27s which were brought from the Russians. The MiG aircraft became infamous after a series of crashes in the last decade and a half. Many critics have often raised the request to retire the MiG aircraft. Bureau Report, WION.
Now, it's been 5 months since Germany went to the polls, and now it looks as though Berlin may finally have a government. Chancellor Angela Merkel's CDU-CSU combine and its erstwhile coalition partner, the Social Democratic Party, will commence the process of forming a coalition. But the Germans are complicated people, and yes, it's not that straightforward either. Beginning today, and with a deadline in about 3 weeks, more than 450,000 Social Democratic Party members will first have to say yes or no to whether they want to team up with Mrs. Merkel's party, that is the Union. The problem is the so-called young socialists within the SDP that dead against joining a CDU-CSU coalition again, and have even enrolled 35,000 new members to the SPD, who will definitely vote against going into a new government with Chancellor Merkel. But WION has learned from SPD sources that despite that, the coalition will in all likelihood be formed. So what will the Social Democrats want, and what are they likely to get? They will, of course, want the key portfolios of the Labour and Finance ministries. The man in the foreign minister seat, Mr. Sigmar Gabriel, is already a popular figure across party lines. Getting finance would be a feather in their cap, as the position is virtually that of Vice-Chancellor. And what about the biggest question hanging over the heads of all European Union countries, including and especially Germany, the question of refugees from the wars in West Asia? WION sources say, though the Socialists and the Christian Democrats were at variance, they have now reached a compromise on that question. Naysayers are many, even in Germany. They shake their heads and say this coalition will never last, and that Germany may well see another fresh poll. But even Mrs. Merkel's greatest critics grudgingly admit that when this coalition is formed, it will complete its remaining term over 3 years. Let's go straight to WION's correspondent, Ira Spitzer from Berlin. Good evening, Ira. Is this a done deal, or does this coalition still face potential roadblocks?
Well, I definitely would not call this a done deal, because the Social Democrat rank and file party members, about 450,000 people, will now have the chance to cast postal ballots on whether to approve or reject this deal. That voting will start on February 20th, will continue for about 2 weeks, and we'll know the results of that on the 4th of March. So that is the biggest hurdle, and probably the only hurdle to actually closing this deal. But the real question there is whether those voters will feel that their leaders have gotten enough concessions from Angela Merkel's conservatives to merit going into this grand coalition again. Now, certainly I think in terms of the ministries that the Social Democrats now will control, and chief among those is the finance ministry. They are planning to now retake that from the conservatives, and that will have major implications both here and abroad. So that is certainly something that will be looked at positively by those voters. However, did their leaders do enough on social welfare issues? Well, that's what they're going to be voting on, and I think there still is some question there. But most likely, we do have a new government in Germany. We'll likely see that happen in the next month or so.
And what does this mean for Mrs. Merkel? In particular, her personal capital? This was being seen as a term for her to cement her international legacy as not a leader just of Germany, but a leader of Europe, one of the tallest in the continent. And now it seems post the election, she's scraping the bottom of the barrel to just remain in office.
Well, I think you summed it up right there, and perhaps this is a fitting way for Angela Merkel to continue her tenure. She's known as somebody who has been willing to compromise, has also not necessarily had fixed ideological positions. And in this brutal 4 months of negotiating, both with the Social Democrats as well as previously in the Jamaica coalition talks, which failed, Merkel has seen sort of her political capital steadily weakened. And I don't think that really changed much today, except for the fact that she will continue to be the Chancellor of Germany. However, from an international perspective, Merkel is still certainly the face of Germany, still the most powerful figure in Germany, still an extremely important politician here. Now, I don't think there was much doubt anyways that this would probably be her last term in office. I think that has been really driven home today with the concessions that the Conservatives had to make. But still, with all that being said, I think today could be seen as a victory for Merkel.
Ira Spitzer, thanks very much for putting it in perspective for us. 5 months post the election, Germany may finally have a government in place. India has been the largest contributor of troops to United Nations missions since its inception. And right now, stationed in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Indian soldiers of the UN peacekeeping forces are keeping vigil 24/7 in far and remote areas. WION's Kartikeya Sharma joined them in Rutshuru and Lake Edward areas to get a glimpse of what it takes to serve in a rive-stricken region.
The town of Rutshuru has experienced violence at the hands of rebels. But it is now being safeguarded by Indian soldiers of the UN peacekeeping forces. It's a challenge to cover such a large area, so they use a special strategy called static combat deployment.
I'm in Rutshuru area of Congo, which is roughly 70 to 80 kilometers away from Congo. And I'm joined by Colonel Naveen Kumar, who is the commanding officer of INBAT. And what we are going to show you today is the real work which MONUSCO does, which is the tip of the spear, which is the static combat deployment, which is what our men in olives with blue caps do in order to ensure that there is peace and safety in areas which are vulnerable and have their own issues. For our viewers, tell us what this static combat deployment is and what does it do for the larger strategy for your force.
Okay, fine. In MONUSCO, as of now, we are working on the concept of protection through projection. I, for one, have an area of more than 5,500 square kilometers, more than 200 villages. So I'm operating from 4 places. So it is not possible to cover the complete area from just those 4 places. So we project ourselves across 2 different inaccessible areas by road or by helicopters. So this is one of the places where you come here, the static combat deployment in Rutshuru. Now the concept of this is you move ahead from your COBs, establish a temporary camp for 7 days to maybe extending to 1 month. Thereafter, you take out the issues regarding the security situation or the community outreach. Whenever we get information of some issues of security, some POC concern, movement of IGs, we take this out. This is a projection of the MONUSCO force.
Rutshuru is also an area with an active presence of militants. Armoured vehicles are essential in modern-day warfare and for the Indian security forces. But how does it feel to be inside one? Well, it is quite claustrophobic, as Kartikeya found out.
You know, we have been showing you what the armored vehicle do when it comes to the peacekeeping forces in Congo. But let me show you what these armored vehicles are. They are pretty small in space, but 6 men have to fit inside, and they are divided into 2 compartments. It's bulletproof. It is used during action, and important part is that the door can be made to stay open. The door can be closed also, depend on the security environment. But the fact of the matter is, it's not an easy task. You know, imagine 6 men fitting like this and staying put here. And imagine this moves, and it is in this the action takes place. It is in this the action takes place, and in this situation, suppose there is a firing happening, so they will use this. This is used to see as to what's happening at the top. So in this claustrophobic space, our men, Indian men, sit inside, 3 there and 3 here, in buddy pair, and then they decide what to do. Suppose there's something happening outside, there's a mirror here. So generally, it is all kept in a way which ensures complete safety. And this is all bulletproof. You look at this, it's not something as if, you know, they've got a lot of space, but ultimately, it's a great safe environment. There's another person who sits here. His job is to communicate with the engine room. He communicates with the engine room, and he ensures that every movement is relayed to him. So there is an eye upstairs, which is there on my left, and then this guy is responsible for ensuring that the soldiers come out. So ultimately the bottom line is that the whole armored vehicle is turned into a machinery, and this machinery is the mainstay of dominating an area. And once the area is dominated, in the sense that, you know, it's like a projection, and this is how it takes place. I'm giving you a little sample of the way you have to be part of this little claustrophobic space, and you have to stay here for 1 hour or 2 hours throughout. Just to give an understanding, the job might look glamorous, but it is not. And you know, it's always a buddy pair. So this will be followed by another one. So it will not go alone. There will be another one which will be following this. So what happens is that once the domination is done, this includes two things. It goes back to the base. It does not stay in open. It's an all-terrain vehicle. And most important of all, it protects Indian soldiers.
Let's turn to London, and British politicians have voted to move out of the iconic Westminster while the ancient building gets some much-needed restoration work done. But fixing up the old place will cost £4 billion, and that has some members of Parliament questioning whether it is time to retire the building. WION's Mandy Clark has the story.
Design experts say Westminster is crumbling into ruin because the building was never designed to house the 7,500 people currently working in it, on top of the million-plus visitors a year. The biggest worries are the plumbing and the wiring. Some have not been replaced since the 1870s and could cause a fire or flood because the infrastructure is simply not fit for purpose. They also need to repair crumbling stonework, replace 4,000 windows, remove asbestos, and also repair damaged roofs. It will take an estimated 6 years and cost nearly £4 billion. Some argue that money would be better served providing Britain with 6 modern hospitals than one vanity project. But Labour MP Virendra Sharma says the argument misses the point.
It signifies the democratic, equal place where we fought for the rights of the individuals, rights for women, rights for disadvantaged groups. This is the building where the world has ruled. And now we are looking at it, what kind of the historical pattern in it. And that's why I believe that it was important to save this building as a history and the future generations to follow it up.
But the MPs won't likely be relocating anytime soon to accommodate the renovations. It will require a full act of Parliament, and that's unlikely to happen until 2025. Mandy Clark, WION, London.
Stunning aerial acrobatics, static aircraft displays and an aerospace and defense exhibition is the talk of the town in Singapore, which is playing host to yet another air show. We bring you the best moments.